Hi, my name is Geneviève Arsenault, and I will talk to you about cortisol and MCI. Let's first have a look at cortisol. It can be measured in any cells of the body, including blood, saliva, and even hair. It's a stress hormone, so you will secrete it when you're physically or psychologically stressed. 4 stress factors have been identified: novelty, unpredictability, threat to self, and sense of loss of control. You may be more or less susceptible to each of these factors, but the more there are of these factors in a given situation, the more likely you will have a stress response. To remember these factors, think about how stress makes you nuts. To secrete cortisol, you need a tiny brain structure right in the middle of it, the hypothalamus. Once activated, the hypothalamus secretes CRF in the pituitary gland, which will trigger the secretion of ACTH in the blood circulation. ACTH will reach the adrenal glands, and that will trigger the secretion of cortisol. This is called the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, or the HPA axis. Because too much cortisol is bad for the body, this system has its own regulation. Cortisol goes back up in the brain and shuts down the HPA axis. You secrete cortisol constantly throughout the day, whether you are stressed or not. Cortisol will be maximal right when you wake up and minimal when you are sleeping. This circadian rhythm is modulated by the internal clock. The internal clock receives information from the eyes, telling the clock if it's day or night. For the same reason, it's possible that cortisol secretion varies throughout the years with the season. One of the main concerns of older adults are the memory loss associated with Alzheimer's disease. Cognitive aging can be conceptualized along a continuum going from healthy normal to dementia. Somewhere along this continuum are the mild cognitive impairment. People with mild cognitive impairment have memory complaints corroborated by deficits on tests not sufficient enough to cause any functional or social impairment, and therefore not satisfying the clinical diagnosis for dementia. These people are at a high risk for Alzheimer's disease. 10 to 15% of them progress annually to Alzheimer's disease as opposed to 1 to 2% in the general population. Alzheimer's disease is the most frequent type of dementia, followed closely by vascular dementia. Often these two dementia occur together. Other types of dementia include frontotemporal dementia and Lewy body dementia. There are many risk factors for Alzheimer's disease. For example, elderly, women, people with lower education, and who have unhealthy lifestyle are at a higher risk for Alzheimer's disease. Carriers of the gene for apolipoprotein E4 are also at a higher risk for Alzheimer's disease, but not all who have the gene will have Alzheimer, and not everyone who has Alzheimer has the gene. The principal symptoms of Alzheimer's disease are the memory loss. They are presumably caused by the death of certain brain cells. A healthy brain has a thick layer of gray matter, normal-sized ventricles, and hippocampus. An Alzheimer brain has a thin layer of gray matter and large ventricles and almost no hippocampus. The brains of the people with mild cognitive impairment are somewhere in the middle. This is called cerebral atrophy. The hippocampus, named after the Latin word for seahorse, is responsible for memory. In Alzheimer's disease, plaques and tangles form in and around the brain cells, causing the death of the hippocampal neurons. These plaques and tangles first destroy the hippocampus, causing the memory deficits, and spread throughout the brain, causing other cognitive deficits such as language, perceptual, and executive function deficits. What's the link between cortisol and mild cognitive impairment, you will ask? Well, it's the hippocampus. Rats and humans have similar hippocampus and HPA axis. Studies have shown that when we stimulate the rat's hippocampus, this shuts down their HPA axis and they secrete less corticosterone, the rat's equivalent to cortisol. Destroying their hippocampus results in more corticosterone. The hippocampus therefore regulates the HPA axis. Because cortisol is neurotoxic to brain cells, researchers have proposed that chronically elevated cortisol makes the hippocampus more vulnerable to Alzheimer's disease pathology. This is called the glucocorticoid cascade hypothesis. However, it's quite possible that hippocampal atrophy caused by Alzheimer's disease is the cause of increased cortisol, we are facing a chicken or egg type of problem. What interests me is to know if we can predict conversion to Alzheimer's disease in MCI by measuring their cortisol. First, we know that Alzheimer's disease patients secrete more cortisol than healthy normal elderly, whether in their blood, saliva, or CSF. What about people with mild cognitive impairment? Do they secrete more cortisol? To learn about this, I invite you to download my second podcast. Thank you.